It may be one shot. It's important. The consequences on civilization are huge. And so we want to be overcautious about not compromising the culture or the technical features of Bitcoin.
Hello there from Bedford in the United Kingdom, the Bitcoin mecca of the world. How are you all? Welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast, which is brought to you by the mighty Kraken, the best place to buy, sell and trade Bitcoin. I'm your host Peter McCormack, and today I've got an interview with Giacomo Zucco and Neil Woodfine, and we're going to be discussing Bitcoin toxicity. But before that, I do have a message from my amazing show sponsors. So first up today we have BlockFi, who are the future of Bitcoin and financial services. Now, with BlockFi, you can open up an interest account and you can start earning interest on your Bitcoin. I am a customer. I've been a customer for nearly a year now, and every month, at the end of the month, I love getting my interest. I love checking out the interest I've received, and I love seeing that my Bitcoin is working for me. But with BlockFi, you can also use your Bitcoin as collateral, and you can take out a USD loan, and you can fund your BlockFi account directly from your Bitcoin wallet. And with the BlockFi mobile app, you can now fully manage your account on the go. If you're interested in checking out BlockFi, I do recommend you do your own research, then head over to blockfi.com, which is blockfi.com. Also, we're going to talk about Kraken, who's my favourite company for buying Bitcoin from. It's the only exchange I use to buy Bitcoin from. You want to know why? You're just thinking, Pete, it's just because they're a sponsor. No, it isn't. There's a couple of other massive reasons I only buy from Kraken. They are consistently rated the best and most secure cryptocurrency exchange. And if you care about security, you want to use an exchange that's got their shit covered with this. They also have the best in class in customer service. So whatever issue you have, whoever you are and wherever you are, they're going to help you get that sorted. And when you want to start trading Bitcoin, they've got every single tool you could possibly want to get going. Now, whatever the level of experience you have, if you head over to kraken.com, it could not be easier to sign up and start trading Bitcoin. They also have a beautiful mobile first app so you can buy Bitcoin on the go. And with their margin trading futures and OTC desk, Kraken has got every option covered for you. There is no better place to trade Bitcoin. You can find out more at kraken.com, or you can download the app. It's available for the iPhone and Android. Just search for Kraken Pro, which is KrakenPro. Okay, so on to the show today, and I am joined by Giacomo Zucco and Neil Woodfine, and we're going to be discussing the role of toxicity in Bitcoin. And I've been discussing this show with Giacomo for a while. This actually is something I was discussing with him before I made my show with Andreas recently. I've been trying to understand the value of toxicity in Bitcoin, whether there are unintended consequences. And I know some people are like, don't touch a subject like this, blah, blah, blah. I always think it's okay to touch these subjects. It's not damaging to touch it. And actually, you can learn a lot from it. So I've been discussing with Giacomo in the background. I'm always asking him ideas. He's always really good to me. Thanks, Giacomo. But in doing the research, I came across this really great thread by Neil Woodfine, who's a pretty hardcore Bitcoiner. So I asked him to join it, and he said he would. Now, for any of you who spends time on Bitcoin Twitter or Reddit, you'll see that it can get pretty hostile there sometimes. And Bitcoiners who have flirted with altcoins may have lost their reputation within Bitcoin circles and get pretty hammered sometimes. And ideas that challenge Bitcoin narratives can often be met with a firm defense. And with Bitcoin being decentralized, this defense is not always consistent, and on certain issues Bitcoiners will fight amongst themselves. And all this can make the Bitcoin community sometimes an intimidating place and make it hard to broach certain subjects or question the status quo. Well, I say that, I don't give a fuck, I usually do it anyway, but sometimes that can lead you into a place where you can have some pretty tough arguments, or people say some pretty tough things to you. However, there is a reason for toxicity. Bitcoin is still quite a wild place, and it's experienced its fair share of scams, questionable projects, and controversial characters. And these hardcore Bitcoiners have learned to be radically skeptical to kind of keep things in place. I mean, Segwit's 2x was a great exercise in seeing how a group of people will try and co-opt Bitcoin to do something else. Now, I've witnessed this myself. I've experienced it myself. I've talked about this. And sometimes I think it's been massively unfair. And sometimes, I've retrospectively looked back and think, yeah, no, that's been fair. But I wanted to get into the role of Bitcoin toxicity. I wanted to ask someone like Giacomo and someone like Neil, I wanted them to help me understand, why is it of so much value? I've felt sometimes that toxicity may have become a badge of honor, overused to harass people. But I shifted my opinion quite a bit in this interview. I did realize I had to kind of self-reflect, and some of my issues with toxicity, actually my own issues that I have to deal with myself. But I did push them hard. I think I got owned a couple of times. But that's exactly why I wanted Neil and Giacomo on. And we did end up going down this like libertarian rabbit hole that I wasn't prepared for. But, it is what it is. Anyway, listen, I hope you enjoy this one. If you've got any questions, you can reach out to me. You know that. It's hello@whatbitcoindid.com. Also, if you head over to my other show, Defiance, we're on part 3 of my new series about Ghislaine Maxwell, who's the ex-partner of disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. And that's at defiance.news. Episode 4 is out on Monday. Hope you go and check that out. Outside of that, have a great weekend, and I will see you all soon. Right, so potentially tricky topic today that I want to talk with you. And I've been talking to you, Giacomo, about this for a little while now, a little bit of planning. And then in doing my planning, I came across an epic thread of Neil's, which made me want to bring Neil into this. But also I obviously speak to both of you offline quite a bit sometimes. I'm not just a lunatic. I do try and run some of my ideas behind you. But I thought discussing the idea or the role of toxicity would be a useful subject because just to set it up, when I first got seriously into Bitcoin, again in 2017, perhaps I didn't notice it, but I didn't really see this term toxicity around. But there definitely was this role of conservatism, especially during S2X. But more recently, I've seen this term toxicity come up more and more, which to me means something more malicious. I've also experienced it some of myself, but then again, that just might be to do with the show growing. But also, I'm really kind of conscious or self-conscious about like the role of the show, and if perhaps myself I'm becoming too soft, or there's any negative consequences for the things I do. Because ultimately, I wouldn't want to damage Bitcoin. I can't, but just kind of self-aware. So, ready to dive into this. You right with this, Giacomo?
Yeah, sure, I'm ready. I love this topic. Actually, as you remember, it was the central topic of my second presentation in Riga, Toxic Maximalism Dissected. And then it was the hidden topic of my presentation after that about shitcoin apologism. So I'm really passionate about this topic. The term toxic itself is, we spent a lot of time thinking about the term maximalism. What does it mean? It's about shitcoins, about changing the Bitcoin protocol, about being nice or not. But toxic is also a very, very interesting story. It's a case of, I think it's called reappropriation, the cultural term, when there is something used as a slur against a group of people, and then they reappropriate it because they see that it's not worth it fighting, so they just appropriate it ironically at the beginning, and then it just become a de facto label. It happened with stuff like queer, racial slur, sexual slur, punks, actually even political parties, Whigs and Tories in UK. They were slur against them, and then they became actually the norm. It also, I think, it also happened in religions and even impressionists. The impressionist movement in art, impressionist was a slur, was a way to insult those guys, and then they start just self-defining as impressionist. So it's a very fascinating topic. I think that we will have some hard time insulating different overlapping debates here, because there are a lot of layers in this discussion. There is a layer which is the general real, not ironically speaking, real toxicity of the internet. So when we create a debate over the internet on Twitter, Reddit, there will be real toxicity, which is basically the typical internet haters culture. So if you become famous with a podcast, people will insult you and threaten you, and that's kind of normal even outside Bitcoin. And I would say, and that's an interesting point of view, I think outside Bitcoin is even more common than inside Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin, being an internet subculture, Bitcoin is strangely non-toxic in this regard, in regard of general internet aggressiveness, internet fights, internet infights. Then there is the fact that shitcoiners mostly, so people trying to use the amount of noise in this space to take advantage of people, they started to use insistently this label toxicity to frame any kind of hard criticism, any kind of strict review, any kind of critical sense, any kind of non-naive attempt at separating bullshit from truth. And this is actually something that in Bitcoin is this positive sense of toxicity is something that in Bitcoin I think is more common than in other subcultures, mostly because there is this don't trust, verify ethics, and there is this focus on verifying and adversarial thinking and stuff like that. So think about marketing. If you think about pasta or food or whatever, if you have a company selling this bag of pasta with the most tasty pasta in the world, nobody really cares. It's not that some nutritional expert will arrive and they will say, oh, this company, they are scammers, because this is not actually the most tasty pasta in the world. This is just quite tasty, but not the most tasty. So they are liars and they are scammers and they have to be blacklisted. In Bitcoin, we basically do that. In Bitcoin, if you have a commercial company and you use classical marketing, which is basically lying to people, but in a way that is considered normal in any other kind of commercial industry right now, in Bitcoin we don't abide, that shall not pass, basically, and we stop it. So this is a positive, fascinating. And then there is the thing that you mentioned, which is the toxicity as conservatism, as Bitcoin is very important and is not fragile, is resistant, but we may even if it's not fragile, we may still act as it is because we want to be over cautious about Bitcoin, because it may be one shot. It's important. The consequences on civilization are huge. And so we want to be over cautious about not compromising the culture or the technical features of Bitcoin. So a lot of stuff to discuss.
A lot of stuff. I guess the root thing I want to get to is, could there ever be any unintended consequences of becoming too toxic? I think that's the ultimate point I want to get to. Like, could things within Bitcoin end up eating itself? That's, I guess, where I'm going to. But before we do that, that's quite a setup, Giacomo, as ever. Fabulous. Neil, just to pass over to you, what's at stake here?
I think people underestimate how important the toxicity debate is, because often what we're doing, in my mind, the toxicity thing is all about two things. One is deflecting conversation away from actual debates. So all of a sudden we start discussing how we should be talking about things instead of actually talking about the thing. And then the second thing is control. So if you can dictate how people should be discussing certain issues, you can start to dictate like what issues they can talk about, where they talk about them, that kind of thing. And if we allow those kind of voices to kind of take control of Bitcoin debates and then deflect away from important conversations, that can distract from really important matters that relate to Bitcoin's operation. And like, Bitcoin fundamentally is implemented at a social level. Like, yes, the mechanical aspects of it, the software, the nodes, the miners, like create a level of automation that allows us to get some kind of social scalability, some scalable consensus going on. But like, it is still implemented socially. And if we allow these kind of like disruptors to disrupt these important conversations, it could have very negative effects on the Bitcoin network and the Bitcoin system in general.
Yeah, and I actually understand that from having the conversation with Andreas, discussing gatekeepers and Bitcoin, which I concluded myself there aren't. And Giacomo, I had a long conversation with you about that before I published it. I did think about that show quite a bit, and I came to the conclusion there wasn't. But I understood the kind of reaction to that some people felt like that would skew the conversation. So I'm with you there, Neil. I understand that. But I guess when I asked you what's at stake here, I'm actually was alluding to your tweet storm with regards to Bitcoin? Like, what's at stake here with regards to Bitcoin? This one chance, this one opportunity.
Right. So I think like what I just mentioned there is one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is like Bitcoin is this invention like gunpowder. And once it's invented, it's not going back in the bottle. And in Bitcoin's case, what we have is a sound money which is completely out of the control of governments and central banks. And that is extremely threatening to some very powerful, very dangerous people. However you feel about politics, it's undeniable that states have engaged in some of the worst kind of actions against man in human history. And then also we know that central banks and commercial banks are very evil institutions in general. They're willing to do anything, or at least certain people at the top are willing to do anything to increase their profits, to increase the amount of debt that's on their books. They're willing to fund two sides of a war. They're willing to start wars to get what they want. So, like, this is the kind of people, the kind of organizations that Bitcoin is competing with. And so all of a sudden, we're talking about, like, I mean, for example, on this podcast, we're talking about toxicity. It's ridiculous to an extent to be talking about this topic when, like, there's like much bigger matters and much bigger issues at hand. For example, Bitcoin versus the banks versus the state. And like right now, Bitcoin is pretty small. Like, it's not on the radar of a lot of influential people. They're keeping an eye on it, but like it's not a big enough issue for it to matter yet. But as Bitcoin's market cap grows and the number of users using it grows, like it will start to frustrate a lot of people. And like if you feel like you live in a completely free country, for example, you live in America and you think like, don't worry, like our constitution and stuff will protect us, nothing totally crazy will happen. You can't guarantee that that's going to be the case for every single country in the world. And there are many countries around the world which may react particularly badly to Bitcoin. And we need to keep that in mind, that these kind of state level threats will be leveled against Bitcoiners, against the Bitcoin network itself in the near to mid future.
All right, well, you've given me a good idea for another show, so maybe it is a benefit to doing this. But I guess one of the reasons I did want to approach it is this kind of self-awareness of perhaps I'm doing things that if I realize, like my own actions can have negative consequences, that I can be producing content that has a negative consequence, which is why I wanted to do this as well. But also in speaking to other people, I interviewed Amiti the other day, who's a new core developer. She was involved in the situation with regards to the renaming of the variable, the blacklist. And that obviously that upset a lot of people. And I disagreed with her. I don't think it should have been changed. I did think that change reflected the politicizing of something in Bitcoin. But at the same time, I was sympathetic to the abuse that she received. And when I talk about unintended consequences, I also noted the Vlad's response to getting quiet, feeling the pressure when that went through. What do you think about that, Giacomo?
So, since you're talking about unintended consequence, I think it's honest to realize there is a trade-off. It's not like toxicity is just a good thing. Toxicity in the good sense, used like a self-reappropriated label. It's not that it's like a silver bullet that will do anything without any kind of consequence. For example, I can see really a pro and cons of having this kind of strong thought mindset. For example, with Vlad, I remember reading Vlad reacting negatively about the polemics about Blocklist. And then I was liking, every time there was somebody like saying, Vlad did a great job, mostly for free, he's very balanced, we have to be thankful. And I was like liking. And then it was somebody else, come on, Vlad, man up, you should resist this stuff. If you will have nation states against you, you should be a little bit more resilient to criticism. This is the internet, so you will always have morons around. And I was liking, because that's true. I mean, come on, Vlad, I mean, you cannot get depressed because somebody disagrees about something that happened. This will happen, ignore us, do something else, we will do our stuff, you will do yours. So there is this kind of that there are two sides, and I see both sides. Mostly I think the trade-offs is mostly like this. the culture of purity, of being rigorous, of being strict, of going outside the comfort zone, of challenging. This is a culture that has some advantage. The first one is intellectual rigor, because we can lower the noise in the ecosystem if we are very strict. If you evaluate any claim very strictly, so intellectual rigor. Then we can avoid, as Neil mentioned, unintended compromises or deterioration of the system, because, well, technically speaking, it's very difficult to change Bitcoin in a bad way. We have seen that with the New York Agreement attack. But even culturally speaking, there are some kind of very slow deterioration that we can have. I mean, the internet on a certain level was too big to fail and too resilient and too anti-fragile to fail. But it did fail in some ways. Like now we have a very centralized DNS. We have a very centralized ISP structure. So the internet was more censorship resistant than it became, because we allowed during the 90s the culture to become more weak, more non-adversarial, more naive, more. So there is the second advantage of purity is that we keep the culture very, very focused on what's important, avoiding a deterioration, a degradation of that. The third advantage is that we self-regulate. Since we try to avoid people from being scammed, or to reduce and mitigate the number of people that will be scammed, we may keep regulators away from us, because scams are actually inviting regulators in. So we have to prove that we can self-regulate. This is a very important point, because some people think that being nasty with scammers, being very strict, being a little bit paranoid is against being libertarians. Like, if you're libertarians, you are for free market, so you should never criticize, you should never analyze, you should never audit, because you're libertarian, but that's not libertarianism. Libertarianism is not using the violence of the state against somebody, but that's require even more scrutiny, not less. In order to keep regulators out of ICOs, we create a culture in which we are over cautious and over critical of ICOs, not less. So it's not like I want the SEC to stop you. I want to criticize you so that the noise is so low and the signal is so high that the SEC will not have easy excuses to come in. And then the fourth advantage is basically pushing people outside the comfort zone. So there is a debate between UX and security, like you always very often mention. But we don't have to think that this is symmetric, because good UX is something that people will spontaneously flow to without any kind of cultural effort. While good security, since there is a very long feedback loop, people need to push themselves and to push each other. It's like between, for example, there is a trade-off in food between tasty and healthy. But not always, but often. But it's not very symmetrical, because, yes, very often. Because the point is that you don't need to have some kind of intervention with your friends and family and to teach your children, come on, let's all try to eat very, very tasty and juicy stuff. That's natural. People will spontaneously go there. You have to be over cautious on the other side to say, I know that you want something tasty, but is this also healthy? So I know that in the short term, your benefit will be in this side of the trade-off. But are you thinking about the benefits on the long term? So when you talk about UX and security, it's pushing people outside the comfort zone is useful, because you need culture for that. You need dogmas, taboos. You need social protocols to force people to be better. You don't need social protocol to force people to just be lazy. So that's occurs naturally. So these are the advantages, but I see the disadvantages. Most of the disadvantages are, the advantages of, let's confront this purity culture with some kind of inclusion culture, where we just prioritize inclusion of everybody. We don't want purity, we don't want focus, we don't want scrutiny, we just want inclusion. So the advantage of these are mostly one, good feelings. It's better to go along with everybody. It's tiring. It's sometimes personally demanding. Like for Vlad, it was very demanding to see negativity. Negativity is bad. It's better if we are all friends, if we can. The second is that actually, if we have more adoption, we can benefit Bitcoin a little bit, because we used to say that Bitcoin doesn't need adoption. That's partially true, but adoption is a nice to have for some things. For example, liquidity. The more adoption, the more liquidity, the stronger Bitcoin is, and the richer Bitcoiners are, which can be useful for the battle against the state. Second, anonymity set. The more people is using Bitcoin in more contexts, the more it's difficult to spy and track, because there is an increased unknown set of people using that. So there is a point in having adoption. Then the third point, the third advantage about inclusion, which many people may think it's not very idealistic, but it's true. It's monetizing. You cannot make money if it's on something which is very, very niche. Like your podcast makes money if we have inclusion and adoption, if we have more people, if we get more capital, more interest, more views, and if we stay niche, that's good for our maybe self-righteousness feelings, but it's bad for monetizing, because it's not easy to make business in something which is very niche. And the last, that I think Andreas mentioned it in your last episode with him, I think that was a very, very good point. This is in trade-off with pushing outside the comfort zone. The point is hypocrisy. So if we create a culture in which we insist that we should do better and that we should go the hard way instead of the easy way, the problem is that we create a culture that is partially necessarily hypocritical, because it's like, come on, guys, let's not eat junk food. And we talk about that. But it's obvious that somebody will eat junk food, and nobody will ever eat perfectly. And so there will be a little bit of tendency for some people to maximize the rhetoric of let's run a node, let's go and join, and then minimize the action, because talking is cheaper than acting. So there will be some degrees of hypocrisy. The purity cultures tend to be hypocritical. Like Andreas said, when you have the purist epurating the less pure, the most pure is often somebody who is just better at lying about how much pure it is. So these points are true. But before I stop this too long answer, I want to point out that even if there is a trade-off, so there is good in purity, it's not that purity is bad. Purity tests are useful socially, and inclusion is useful socially. But the situation is not symmetrical, mostly for two reasons. The first, if Bitcoin fails because it becomes too niche, too strong, too hard, it's still working in a way for some people. If Bitcoin fails because it becomes too normalized, to mainstream, without any privacy, without any hardness, if Bitcoin normalizes too much, Bitcoin becomes completely useless. If Bitcoin remains too pure, Bitcoin is still useful, even if maybe not as powerful as it could be, finding the perfect balance. So my point would be Goldilocks balance would be better. If we can fine-tune the point exactly in between too much purity and too much inclusion, I'm all for finding the perfect balance. But if you have to be mistaken, if you have to err, I think it's always safer to err on the side of more purity than to err on the side of more inclusion. Also because you have this problem of this contradiction of people, and I think that Andreas may be sometimes erring on this side, that becomes purists of inclusion. So you have the nasty guy like the scammer, then you have the purity guardian that will react very harshly to the scammer. He will be toxic to the scammer. Then we have the nice guy that will say, come on, don't be toxic with the scammer. And then you will have the purity tester gatekeeper of niceness that will actually target not the scammers, but the guys reacting to the scammers, and they will basically be super unwelcoming and super gatekeeping against these guys. For example, the reaction that a typical example was the blacklist debate. So this anonymous developer proposed to change blacklist to a terrible idea, blacklist, because people with dark skin could be offended, which is actually crazy. But nobody actually blocked this guy from GitHub. Nobody insulted this guy very much. People reacted. But then when somebody, Ben Verrett, came to push a better term in agreeing with Vlad in a very constructive way, some developers actually signaled Ben to get him banned from GitHub for trolling. So the reaction of the nice guy is actually becoming even more toxic than the toxic reaction against the initial perceived threat, which is paradoxical.
Right. Yes, we're like in toxicity inception now. I'm a bit lost with it. But I understand it. Like I tend to be a little bit softer myself. I'm a bit of a centrist. Like I'm not full libertarian, and I just tend to sit on the middle of the road. So I get that. And it's funny you raise the UX thing, because that's usually what me and Neil kind of fight against each other a little bit privately. But I understand. Like I am trying to understand it. And I actually had a conversation with Gigi the other day, where I was talking to him about UX, because he wrote a very good article, and I've definitely been one of the people, along with Dan Held, talking about UX. And I guess the reason I bring the UX up is not a criticism of anyone particularly doing work. Like, I think the devs are doing great work. But when I see particular people talk about some of the great things about Bitcoin, like it's a great hedge against inflation, now everyone should be buying Bitcoin, fiat is dying, hurry, blah, blah, blah. And then I talked to someone like Gigi, who said, look, UX is about 5 years away from being user-friendly. Most people are going to make mistakes with privacy. I see that as a contradiction. So that's when... Does that make sense, Neil? Like, in that kind of area, I'm like, well, should we really be telling people that, it's the best money that's ever existed. It's the hardest money. It's a hedge against inflation. Fiat's going to die. Oh, but by the way, you have to meet these UX hurdles. You have to understand XPubs. You have to understand CoinJoin. You have to understand coin control, which majority of people I just don't think will meet that technical barrier.
So I mean, I've said to you before, I don't think I don't think the conversation that goes on Twitter, which is Bitcoin UX is bad, we must dumb it down. And that's like basically the summary of the comments that yourself and other people are making. And it's just repeating that over and over again. This is too complicated.
I'm not sure that's true.
Right. I think it is. And it's not constructive. It's not improving the state of Bitcoin UX whatsoever. What will improve Bitcoin UX is profit-driven companies building products to meet market demand. And there's various different types of Bitcoin users within the Bitcoin space. People with a trader has completely different needs to a hodler, for instance. They require different types of UI, different levels of technicality. Within the trader space, you get beginners, you get experts. They all have different needs. And what will solve this problem is Bitcoin companies producing good Bitcoin UIs and their users gravitating towards them and giving them sats, giving them money. And any amounts of just repeatedly kind of banging that message, Bitcoin is too complicated and people shouldn't have to learn this, shouldn't have to learn that. It's totally useless. It's just going into the void. It's not helping anything. But relating this back to toxicity, we're talking about UX now. Right now, we're talking about the merits of various different views and stuff like that. We're not talking about how we should talk about this topic, which is important. Let's talk about ideas, and we'll probably never agree on certain things. Me and Giacomo have lots of disagreements on various different things, I'm sure. So we just have to accept that. And just going back to the Amiki and Vlad example, I would like to see some specific examples of what they considered to be abuse. So, for example, if they're getting some really nasty, abusive DMs, that's abuse. Nobody condones that. When we talk about Bitcoin toxicity, nobody's supportive of that. However, I think they're conflating a lot of genuine, thoughtful criticism that's being directed their way. And some of it is probably quite angry and pointed, but they've got to accept that this is part of working on Bitcoin, because the internet and the world is a big place, and the amount of Bitcoin users is growing, and we're just 100% not going to agree on everything. And this stuff, some people hold millions of dollars in Bitcoin, and they really care quite strongly about what's going on in the Bitcoin GitHub repository, what's going on the inside of their nodes. So I think it's important that we're specific and that we discuss the actual idea rather than kind of divert the conversation to this totally pointless meta conversation about how we should be talking about this and where should we be talking about it.
I mean, I don't agree with everything you said there, but I think you'd expect that.
Yes.
So I think there's different podcasts out there, and some of them are pro Bitcoin, and I don't mean that like Balaji, I mean just like very pro Bitcoin, talk about all the benefits, Austrian economics, and they do great jobs, I think. But I try to do mine as a different point. I don't see it as a cheerleading for Bitcoin. I see it as dealing with a wide range of issues. And maybe these are the issues that new people coming into Bitcoin are questioning, and it helps them answer it. Or maybe I'm trying to reflect the opinions of other people, and I've got hundreds of examples of feedback that I've received. So when I talk about UX, it's because I'm trying to explain that there are people who do struggle with this. And it's not to say that anything has to change, and it's not to criticize anyone, but it's just to say, look, there's certain things that people find really difficult. So, for example, when Luke Dasher talks about the number of people operating a node at the moment is dangerously low, then I will raise the issue of, well, this is why I think people won't operate a node, and these are these reasons, and a lot of it's to do with the UX. And I actually think that is a valid conversation, because it is a counter to a point that somebody very central and critical to Bitcoin has made as a risk. So I don't see it as a non-issue to bring it up. Sadly, I don't actually know the kind of like abuse things that I've seen from Amit and Vlad directly. I mean, I know the ones I've received, and they're brutal, and they're offensive, and they go as far as telling me, I hope you die and get cancer like your mother, and you're a paedophile, and it's full on. And I don't tolerate it, and I don't think it's acceptable. And if I see other people do it, I do stand up against it. But at the same time, there are people who, certain names, we don't need to go into detail, but like there are people who are acting toxic, and I don't think sometimes we do always stand up against it. And I think sometimes people are given a voice when they are particularly offensive. And I know, Giacomo, you'll say, well, like I get it. If the answer to this is, look, Pete, we have to accept this. This is what it requires to create the best money. All right, I get it. I understand that. But I at least want to know that's what people think.
So I think that the answer is we should accept that on the internet you will receive toxicity in the real sense, in the bad sense, and the more exposed you are, the more you will receive that kind of shit. I remember we discussed the Tim Ferriss article about the level of hate he received when he became famous. It's a very good article, and also good. Not just hate. Yeah, it's very good. So celebrity plus anonymity on the internet creates this kind of very bad stuff, and this is something that I think people will just ignore, but famous people within a niche will have to accept. I do have some of that myself, smaller, because you have a wider reach. You just have more generalized. I'm more niche as a Bitcoiner on Twitter. You are more. You have a bigger audience, and you have a perceived success. So success plus visibility plus internet will always gather that kind of situation. I think we have to accept, because I don't have any brilliant idea to fix the internet, to fix nasty people over the internet. But we should probably be able, and thanks to you for this distinction, to distinguish the real nastiness of people writing that kind of stuff from the self-appointed reappropriation of ironic, sarcastic toxicity that is the way we label the harsh criticism on merit, which is not personal, which is just on the things, which is just on the topic itself. So it's like, I don't know if other people reappropriating a term had the same problem. Maybe you have the punk people in punk music, and they want to make people know that they are not real punks in the bad term, or the queer literature, queer studies. They're not queer in that sense. They are trying to be professional, but they are just reappropriated the label. So toxicity in a pseudo-sarcastic way as be strict, be conservative, be verifying, auditing, demanding. That's something I think we should overall sustain and defend, while being bad with other people without any reason on the internet is something that is called toxicity, but this overlapping is actually the thing that Neil was talking about deflection. So people that will receive honest criticism and factual criticism, they will try often, and they did try often, to deflect into just being nasty. So yeah. I'm criticizing you because of this. But now you are just doing like the guys threatening me on PM. So that's why I think that Nate was very on point when he asked about specifics. Even when Matt Corallo twice on the distance of 2 years launched an appeal about being nice, most of the people, I think that the most appropriate response was not "you're crazy," but was "what are you talking about exactly?" Because some scammers may use your appeal in order to pretend a better treatment for their scams, and we don't want to do that. Some guys that attacked Bitcoin with New York Agreement, they will try to use your appeal in order to pretend and demand a whitewashing of the past history, and we don't want to do that. We want to be strict. We want to be able to judge fairly but honestly at the best of our capabilities. But if you're talking about somebody attacking viciously somebody else for no reason, we would like to see this difference, because one thing is the ironic toxicity, that is the reappropriation of the label, and one thing is bad people on the internet that we know exist and we don't want to be and we don't want to condone. I think that in your show in particular, there may be something that creates this kind of collision.
Right.
Yeah, especially because I think you're trying to do two things which are both very, very useful and very, very good in themselves, but you do them together. The first, you're trying to talk with non-experts, simplifying, because non-experts need simplification. Noobs, newcomings, non-expert. The second, you try to be like a challenging journalist, asking difficult questions. But these two things are not very easy to do in the same show with the same people, because noobs and non-experts will easily get lost into nuances, and they will just miss a reassuring narrative. And if you don't provide that, they will just get to take it from some kind of scammer. For example, I am a noob. I listened to your podcast about Lightning with Taj, and Taj will actually do something great. He will actually pinpoint all the problems of Lightning, which are many. They are huge, and the noob will just get lost in the nuances, and they will just now join some shitcoin narrative like Bcash or BSV or something like that, or possibly because nuances are one thing and simplification for noobs is another thing. And I think that we already discussed this in private messages. Maybe you will get less reactions if you separated simplification job from challenging job, and beware that simplification job will allow you to claim that you are non-technical. But in order to ask difficult question, you will have, and you can because you're smart, you will have to actually get into more technicality, and you cannot avoid that. It's like a journalist asking a difficult question to to Trump about military politics, and then Trump says, "But these missiles are like this," and they are saying, "Oh, I'm not technical about missiles. I'm not." I mean, you have to, because when you ask difficult questions, unfortunately, you have to get deeper into details. You cannot avoid it.
Yeah, no, they're really fair points, and that did weigh on me after that conversation. Next up, I talked to Giacomo and Neil more about toxicity and Bitcoin, but before that, I do have a message from my amazing sponsors. So, we're going to talk about Casa, who are, without doubt, the best in Bitcoin security. Now, with Casa, it could not be easier to protect your Bitcoin from hackers, personal mistakes, in-person attacks, device failures, and so much more. And I'm now a customer. If you've been listening to the show regularly, you know that. I am now a customer. I am a paying customer. Look, I freaking love it. It's totally solved my security headaches. All the things I was worried about, it's all done. It's all sorted. I can't fuck this up anymore. And listen, Bitcoin's going to kill it this year. We've just seen Square put money into Bitcoin, 50 million. We know what MicroStrategy did. If the companies start coming in, your Bitcoin holding is going to be worth a whole lot more. So you should definitely go and check out Casa. And listen, they've got a product for every Bitcoiner out there. With Casa Gold, you get triple the security of a hardware wallet for only $10 a month. With Casa Platinum, you get their 3 of 5 multi-sig, the best protection for large Bitcoin holders. That also comes at a great price. And with Casa Diamond, you get the full service offering. That includes a customized personal security review, inheritance planning, and of course, their best-in-class security. There's no better time to upgrade your Bitcoin security. So if you want peace of mind, head over to keys.casa, which is keys.casa. Also, we're going to talk about my other sponsor, sportsbet.io. who are the best in online gaming. And you heard recently that the Premier League is back, and you heard that they're sponsoring Southampton. You heard they put a Bitcoin logo on their shirt, and you also heard that they are sponsoring Arsenal. Do you know why they do all this? They love Bitcoin. They absolutely love Bitcoin. I've been over to Estonia. I've spent time with the team. I've been out for drinks with them. They want to promote Bitcoin, and they're now putting it in front of billions of football fans worldwide. And with football back on the TV and the Premier League back in swing, and we're not going to talk about Liverpool's result against Aston Villa. What a shocker. But there is no better time to put a wager on your team. And at sportsbet.io, they always have promotions for football fans. Just head over to sportsbet.io/promotions. And Sportsbet is SPORTSBET. That's .io/promotions. And lastly, this week, but not least, we're going to hear from Least Authority, who I welcomed back as a sponsor recently. Now, they are for you techies out there, the people who are building the applications. Least Authority is a security consulting company pushing the limits of how to build privacy-respecting solutions. They specialize in security audits, design specification reviews, and security by design. And they can help you improve the security of your wallet application, key management solution, layer 2 protocol, P2P network design, use of cryptography, and look, so much more. And do you know what? You can get a no obligation call. You can reach out to them and they will do that with you, talk to you about how they can help you with your security strategy. To do this, just head over to their website. They've got a schedule a call button. Hit that and they will get back to you. And that's at leastauthority.com, which is leastauthority.com. Just one last thing on that toxicity point before I move on to the next thing, because I do want to quote Neil, because Neil's got some great quotes. Do you think there's any risk where the toxic badge of honor could ever radicalize someone to the point of doing something dangerous or stupid? So a few years ago, for example, we saw Lop got swatted. Do you think we could ever get to the point where someone wants to make a name for themselves in Bitcoin? They like this toxic badge of honor. They want to be toxic. They see someone as a threat and could ever feel radicalized to the point of doing something crazy? Or do you think that's just so far out, just don't fucking worry about it?
I think that's possible in any subculture and project, from Linux to whatever. Any kind of project where there is this struggle between inclusion and purity can have that kind of radicalization. But to put everything in context, I think that Bitcoin is one of the contexts where that is less dangerous and less probable and less likely and less concerning, for the simple reason that it's over the internet. So even the worst thing that can happen is still speech. And it's a project based on pseudonymity. Even if most developers right now, they are known, there is no reason a good developer could not be anonymous like Satoshi was, which is actually something, the whole point of crypto anarchy was to make physical violence impossible, because people will just commerce over the internet using names. I know that we are not there yet, because using pseudonymous is difficult, it's super expensive, it's super costly, so people don't do that. We are not doing that. We are using our face, which is not the best of sec, but it's just simpler. We prefer that. But in Bitcoin, where most of the interaction are based over the internet, and when we can go all anonymous or pseudonymous if we must, I think that we still have the risk of violence following debate, but it's a less strong risk than in any other context, which is, by the way, also connected to the blacklist situation, because for the very same reason that we are over the internet, that we are approaching slowly crypto anarchy, stuff like the amount of melanin in my skin or the genitals that I have down there are basically less important in Bitcoin than in almost any other subculture I can even imagine. What is a possible gatekeeping barrier for me in Bitcoin? One, technical knowledge. That's a barrier, but that's a reasonable barrier. Two, language, because before I started to talk with this Oxfordian English that I'm showing off now, like 6 years ago, I was completely barred from contributing meaningful to Bitcoin debate because I didn't know how to speak English. That's an important barrier. Skin color, genitals, nobody even see that over the mailing list. So they are not really important. They may be important only in social context around Bitcoin, like this conference. And if somebody is as good looking as me on a stage, Of course, he will have some advantage over you, Peter, because I mean, look at us. But this is in very particular. This is just in very particular. No, I mean, I know. To be serious now, you are taller than me, so you will inside. If we have a physical debate and we are facing each other and we are screaming, you have like a lower voice and you are taller, so you will have, from a physical point of view, an advantage in a conversation, aggressive conversation. Over the internet, we don't give a fuck. So even that threat.
Over the internet, you have an advantage that you know more than me and you're funny. I'm not particularly funny. So we all have our advantages in different situations.
Internet is a leveler in a way. It tears down a lot of differences, and also it can reduce physical aggression risks. So I'm not scared about radicalization.
As well, you can't link physical violence to criticism. This is exactly what I was talking about in this kind of like attempts to control the conversation, because basically anybody that disagrees with you in a kind of forthright manner, you can immediately say that they're radicalizing some kind of loonies on the internet, or statistically run some probability of potentially radicalizing some loonies, which then go and do something horrible to somebody else, and then like attribute some of that blame to the person making the criticism. And all of a sudden, you've kind of conflated verbal criticisms of ideas with this kind of threat of physical violence. It's insane. Like, yes, there are total crazies out there online and they may do horrible things, but it has got nothing to do with people making criticisms of people online. And like, we can look at any of these instances. I mean, when toxicity is leveled at the Bitcoin sphere, it's generally coming from shitcoiners, no coiners. There's been a kind of an increasing group of inclusion-focused Bitcoiners doing it these days, Bcashers. Like, all of these people are generally in the wrong, or at least potentially in the wrong, and they don't want to discuss the idea, and therefore they're just pushing us into this realm of like, your behavior and the way you're talking to me and criticizing my ideas is potentially posing a threat to me physically. And like, immediately that shuts down the conversation. You can't. I mean, it just escalates things to this level of like, I've just physically threatened you. Like, you can't, like, most of the people that we're talking about, the people that are labeled toxic in the Bitcoin sphere, they lead by example. They may say things in a way that people don't like, but they are always civil. They're never, or very rarely, abusive. And then there's another issue is like this idea that like toxic Bitcoiners are tolerating the abusive Bitcoiners. Like, somebody else being abusive is not my problem. Like, this idea that I'm complicit in their abuse, if I don't like shut them down and like create a campaign to have them like blocked by everybody, like, that's their problem. They're an arsehole. And like, whoever they're abusing should take steps to block them and shut out any kind of channels for them communicating. But that's not on me. And I think that's a very big problem, that like in this toxic conversation, it's conflating these abusive, horrible people with this larger group of people which are just interested in Bitcoin. They're very passionate about Bitcoin, and they have different ideas to the people that are accusing them of being toxic.
I think there are different ideas within Bitcoin as well. Okay, so I wouldn't say there is consistency, certainly on political ideas, for example. So I've got you. This is a great quote, Neil. The Bitcoin industry culture is therefore necessarily one of extreme skepticism, cynicism, rigorous review, and forthright language, regardless of whether you're discussing Bitcoin development, business, or economics. No one is safe. That's brilliant. That quote alone was like, that made me really think about, well, firstly, just wanting to be part of this show, but think about my own points of view on this. But there isn't consistency with political ideas. There can be plenty of people who are Bitcoin only, but aren't into the idea of maybe anarchism or libertarianism, who aren't completely into the idea of a no-state solution. And I know that's, or even maybe some people who this will challenge you, Giacomo, who like the thoughts of a police force. I know you have a discussion with Daniel Buckner regarding some footage from a police shooting. you both have very similar political ideas, but you disagreed maybe on that point because he thought, with regards to the police, well, you'll still have a private police force who would still maybe want identities. The point being is, like, what I'm trying to get to is that sometimes some of the conversations can get... Well, I guess the question I'm asking is, when you say Bitcoin culture and then you say extreme skepticism and cynicism, I agree with all of those points. But do we have a consistent culture around political ideas within Bitcoin? Because I would say we don't. I think there's almost factions.
I think you're 100% correct. And I would even say that there's a large portion of developers which are probably quite left-leaning from a like kind of traditional meaning of the sense. Personally, I think that's contradictory with just the very kind of essence of Bitcoin. And I could provide a lot of arguments for that, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about differences of opinion and like whether that affects the culture. So yes, there is those differences of opinion, but I don't think that's part of the culture. Like libertarianism, you could maybe make an argument that it's perhaps a subculture of Bitcoin, but what definitely is part of Bitcoin culture is the skepticism, the cynicism, and the debate. Regardless of which kind of side of that political debate you land on, you're still going to be in those heated, pointed discussions, especially when it comes to like how to move the technology forward and how to protect it against certain threats. Like there's just no avoiding it. And if you want to avoid that, you're doing it wrong and you're outside of Bitcoin culture. And there's a lot of people that have kind of tried to fight against it, and I think have come out pretty badly. And there are a lot of people that are currently fighting against it. And if they don't kind of adapt to that culture, they probably will find themselves working on different projects.
Does that include me?
No, I don't. I mean, this is the funny thing.
God, you're so toxic.
A lot of these people, a lot of these people are implying that they're going to leave Bitcoin if the entire internet doesn't get nice all of a sudden. Like one, the internet is not going to get nice. That's just not happening. And like all your complaints are falling on deaf ears. It's totally useless. And two, these people are going to come back. Like there's no way that, for example, you decide that everybody's too rude to you online. They don't like your ideas. You're going to go off and work on some other project. Like I guarantee you within like 6 months to a year, you're going to see all these exciting things happening on Bitcoin. Like the price is going to have gone up. There's going to be all these intelligent people having these exciting debates. You'd be back. Like just all the threats are just like completely empty. Like,
I think one thing, just so listeners understand, is that me and Neil are both from the UK, but he's from the Northeast, and they raise them a lot tougher. There's no sunshine, everything's grey and cold and wet, and you just grow up tougher. Whereas I'm in the middle, where it's a bit more green, everyone's a bit happier. It's a bit sunnier. We get some of the sunshine, so that's maybe why we're a little bit different, Neil. That's why maybe you're a bit more toxic than me.
It's like a Winterfall man against King's Landing hedonists.
Yeah. What do you think about the political stuff, Giacomo? Because the political stuff does come up a lot, and there are a lot of differences. Does it matter?
So I think that Bitcoin is this is a similar trade-off or a part of the trade-off we were discussing before. I discussed the purity versus inclusion, and in a way, this trade-off is actually overreaching of other topics, trying to extend the idea of Bitcoin consistently, as much consistently as possible, or anything else. So using Bitcoin as a tool to understand better or to challenge better other knowledge, other convictions, other ideas, or restriction of Bitcoin to try to stay on topic, stay there. So we are basically a restriction will lead to more inclusion, because if we try to agree on very few things and not even discuss everything else, we will be more inclusive because we will not clash about everything else. While if we try to be very purist and we try to search rigor and consistency over anything else, then we will probably be tempted to actually expand the logical consequences, because the universe is just one thing, life is just one thing. We can use topics and domains to as a tool to divide knowledge. But actually, if A is equal to A is equal to A everywhere. 1 and 1 is 2, and there is one logical consistency everywhere, from nutrition to climate, to animal rights, to borders, to police, to software engineering, to everything. So there is this trade-off here, and it's very important in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin didn't start inside a well-defined domain like computer science. Bitcoin starts at the overlap, at the intersection of very different domains, at least three. One is basically financial, economical, about hard money, sound money, central banks, value, what is value, and stuff like that. The other is exclusively technical, about peer-to-peer system and cryptography and infosec, and very technological kind of field. And the other one is basically political, libertarianism, anarchism, crypto anarchism. And this connection is not just made up, it's explicit. People in the cypherpunk mailing list was discussing anonymity, pseudonymity, crypto anarchy. There was not everybody was 100% anarchists. Most cypherpunks were not, but there was a strong connection with this kind of line of thought. So what happens is that right now you have people that are very, very sold on one of these things. They are purists in one of these things, but they are just, in my opinion, contradictory or not that consistent in other fields. For example, you have a developer that maybe will be super clear in his thinking about peer-to-peer system, cryptography, or cryptographic primitives, but they will not really understand that 1 + 1 makes 2 when they discuss police and borders and animal rights and food and whatever, because the fact that they are separating the state for money in one specific sector they don't accept to be challenged in other sectors. So yes, we can throw away central banks, but I mean public health, that's different. So yes, I can challenge economists, but challenging doctors, well, that's different. So the same kind of approach of method that you use in Bitcoin for one thing, you may not be willing to expand it on other things. And this is also a trade-off, because as we said, if I didn't discuss anything which is not strict, for example, politically speaking, within Bitcoin, if you accept that monetary policy should not be controlled by politicians, but should be algorithmic, and if you accept that a sound monetary policy is preferable to an inflationary monetary policy, and if you accept that financial freedom should be unrestricted without any kind of censorship, then whatever you think about co-ops is not really relevant. It's most a matter of intellectual rigor and intellectual integrity. For me, I want to use I want to approach people and say, if you do understand Bitcoin, I'm challenging you to use the same method, the same rigor, the same critical thinking, the same independent verification approach to something else that you just accepted because experts, because my father did, my family, my country, because that's the normal way. If you are being a nerd in Bitcoin, try to be a nerd also in something else. And so I like to challenge people about that. And this is not really left versus right either, because not for me at least, because when we discuss police, right-wing Bitcoiners, they hate me because I think that monopolizing violence in the hand of a single organization is crazy, is suicidal, just like central banking. And it will be as dangerous as central banking, and it can be solved just like central banking can be solved. Maybe not directly by Bitcoin, but indirectly. And right-wing people would hate me because of that. And when I talk against borders, and I talk about, like, guys, you may love Trump's wall, but you may know that you should know that Bitcoin is made to go across walls. Bitcoin will be used also for smuggling goods and people across borders, because that's what censorship resistance does. People will use Bitcoin to smuggle goods, services, and people across borders. And right-wing Bitcoiners hate that. Left-wing Bitcoiners usually they have other kind of idiosyncrasies that I fight about, which is mostly the abolition of the centralized welfare state, which is not the abolition of any welfare activity. It's just a decentralization. And recently, since the international left seems culturally speaking, seems to go in the direction of censoring speech and the direction of establish this kind of healthcare-based dictatorship, I will probably clash with left-leaning people about that. And then, of course, about so-called social justice warriorism. So considering speech as violence, which, as Neil said, is it's a very important point, because if speech is violence, then everything is violence as nothing is. We cannot anymore distinguish between somebody punching you and somebody disagreeing with you. So we lose everything. So the point is that you can find developers that are actually that are very good in technicality, but they are clueless about investment and they are clueless about libertarianism. You can find libertarians, a lot of them, completely clueless about the technology, like Roger Ver about scalability, or completely clueless about a fundamental monetary theory, like shitcoiners, which are libertarians, but they think that libertarianism means that barter is better than one kind of money, which is technically false, but they just don't understand. So we have three kinds of culture overlapping in a very complex way. And I think I will want to challenge. I remember you posting, Peter, posting this, the pie chart about people interested in Austrian economics and cypherpunk, and they're very small people, small slide of the pie. But I think that if you do that pie better, you will find that a lot of people are interested in political theory, just not in technology. And a lot of people are interested in technology, but not on monetary theory. And if you try to take all the complex topics that Bitcoin is going to challenge, you will see that probably everybody, even if you are a normie, most of your knowledge will be heavily challenged and affected by taking Bitcoin seriously.
Yeah, I mean, that pie chart was really designed to trigger a conversation, which it did. You know, this is a conversation for another day, perhaps, about libertarianism, in that, like, I think it's, I support it, a lot of the ideas directionally. I just don't think it's achievable, but we can do that another day. A different point, though, being in that these kind of, like, other ideas, these other topics that tend to get discussed around Bitcoin, perhaps one of the things is that there's no real unifying definition of what Bitcoin is or is meant to be. Like, is it money? Is it digital gold? If it's digital gold, well, can it not just be an asset that is like gold but better, but exists in the societal structure we have? Some people talk about what Bitcoin can become, which can be, you know, separation of money and state. Which ultimately, if you have separation of money and state, you probably have the end of the state. So you probably move to more towards anarchism. But is that actually fundamentally part of Bitcoin? Could it be that potentially a lot of people just want this better form of money, and they want it, but within a current kind of democratic structure? Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but the point is, do you want to? The point is your intention. Do you want to try to extrapolate from logical consistency, or do you want to limit yourself at the point on topic? Both approaches has advantages, like focus versus extrapolation. They both have the advantages. So think about, you are a guy promoting the printing press during Gutenberg times. So you are analyzing the printing press from a technological and social point of view, and you think that the printing press will actually destroy the capability of the new nation states and of the church to censor books. Because now, instead of having few people writing books by hand, you have a printing press. So censorship of forbidden books will basically crash down. So what do you do? Do you want to... so now you're talking with a guy that says, the printing press is great, and I just want a more efficient way to print my stuff. I don't care about free speech. That's just a radical view that is it's too niche for me. I mean, only crazy anarchists talk about ending the list of forbidden books. So I'm a normie. I just want better press. What do you do with this normie? If you think that you see, and if you think that you're right, and you are seeing a connection, a social connection between that kind of technological improvement and the global wider problem of censorship of books, you have two choices. One is you poke this guy and you say, you think that censorship of book is fine, but you know that the technology that you are promoting and developing in your company is going to make censorship of book basically impossible. And don't you understand that there is a logical consistency in that, and that censorship of books was also bad? Or the other approach is, don't poke him, don't bother him. He's helping you, so why do you care for getting him on your side? So one side is just a pleasure of intellectual consistency. You are helping the guy to understand. You think that you use Bitcoin as a tool to make some guy awake from some kind of fallacy or misconception. The other approach is, don't bother the guy who is helping your evolution without even knowing it. So I think they're both valid. I like the first, as you can imagine. Because I like logical consistency. I like, maybe in some topics I'm wrong, but if I think I'm right, I will not censor myself because I could displease somebody. Like most of Bitcoiners are atheists. I think probably you guys are both atheists. I don't know. I think atheism is a logical contradiction, and I will trigger people with this all the time because I like it, because I think it's true. So I like to be logically consistent, and even if this can create conflicts where before there was friendship, because I mean it's still friendship if you help each other finding misconception and strengthening your thought.
Yeah, but these logical consistencies are debatable points about ideas about societal structures. It doesn't mean it will work out that way because of human nature, the way that people are. So, like,
my biggest issue with those kind of points are it's very unspecific about. It provides no alternative view for how things will turn out. It just says the real world is complex. People have human nature, and the future is unpredictable. Therefore, we don't know, and that's not interesting. Like, well, no, if you don't,
I actually had a point. So my point being is, it wasn't just. I just don't think it's possible to have like a cohesive anarchist society. Like, I understand. Like, I completely support every one of your arguments for why the state is bad, Giacomo. But what I did do is I kind of went and studied like the human hierarchy of needs, like the way we operate. I think the state is inevitable in certain situations, and therefore, and also I think some people want to lead, some people want to be led. Not every state is bad. The problem we have is these super states, which are bad, right?
Well, there are two different statements there. One is it's inevitable. I mean, for now, cancer is inevitable. Doesn't mean it's good to have some cancer. So one thing is, I don't believe it's realistically to get rid of this. And one thing is, I think that some degree of this is good. They are completely different claims. I agree with the skepticism of people that says getting rich of big mafias, which what I think states are, is unrealistic. I agree. Crime will always be there, and so organized crime will be there, and states are just a subset of organized crimes for me. So they will probably always be there at some form. But one other thing is, since it's inevitable, then a small degree of it is also right or good. Well, no, that's the same for diseases. You want to, if you are a doctor, you want to your goal is perfect health. Is perfect health possible? No. Death and diseases and old age will always be there, but you strive to get a better quality of life for longer time. And so I would strive for always more freedom from crime and more defense of property right. But it doesn't mean that I think that it will just that there will be an Eden where crime will disappear. The proof that this view is naive is that states exist in the first place. If state exists, it means that there is no stable situation in which state cannot arise. It can always arise. Otherwise, it will not exist in the first place. So it's fully anarchist doesn't mean optimistic about the realism of complete abolition of organized crime. Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess what the point I'm trying to get at is like, I'm trying to understand there is like this, like, I know your end goal. Well, I suspect I know your end goal. I just think it's not that it isn't achievable, and it's not that it shouldn't be commendable. Like like maybe you can't get rid of cancer, but you should at least try. But the point is, like, what do we do now Yeah, what do we do within the structure we're in? Like, how do we cope? How do we survive? How do we deal with situations such as lockdowns and such? So I'm always trying to, like, should I just, and I do question this, I do wrestle with this, should I just extract myself from that? The ultimate goal is freedom, and therefore everything should directionally move towards that? Or do I kind of like play within the kind of field we're in now and accept where we are? And do you understand what I'm wrestling with?
Sure, but that's about priorities and personal strategies. As Neil said, the world is complex, and even if we can agree, we can debate and find the truth using logics, doesn't mean that priorities will be simple to find. For example, I have many friends that says prohibition about drugs is bad because it's logically bad. But I don't care because I don't need drugs. I don't like drugs. So this is the last battle I will always fight because I really don't care. This is not a priority for me. Many things that are not about this are more important to me. So this is completely fine. I don't think that everybody should have the same priority. That the society is complex. The world is complex. So it's a feature that we can have different priorities. But if you think that some of your reasonings is logically wrong, I don't think it's a feature to have somebody being logically wrong. I think it's more a feature to interact in that case and to find if we can actually pinpoint the fallacy there.
Okay. So I interrupted you, Neil, when you were responding.
No, it's fine. I was getting quite animated.
Yeah.
I think it's just a general frustration with conversations that go on Twitter. There's kind of, among a large portion of Bitcoiners, there's this common thread where they start mocking some of the more libertarian-minded Bitcoiners about their claims that Bitcoin will help defund the state and reduce the size of the state. But they don't provide any alternative viewpoints on what Bitcoin will do. So, for instance, if Bitcoin succeeds, there are only three possible outcomes. One, it causes the state to retreat. Two, it empowers the state and the state grows. Or three, nothing changes. And nothing changes seems extremely unlikely. And if you think that reducing the state is ridiculous, of course they'll still tax people. Explain how that's going to happen. How is it going to increase under a Bitcoin standard? And I think it's very difficult. I mean, you don't see anybody doing that one. I think it's very difficult to argue that case, because by taking away the power of central banking from the state, you take away a massive toolkit from the state for enforcing and broadcasting their power around a geographical area. So I just get frustrated with that kind of they kind of make this kind of high horse point of view. It's the world's way more complex than that, and these problems are difficult. You think just buying Bitcoin will solve this. It's well, it's not going to solve everything, but it will create better conditions for reducing the power of the state, and that's not completely nonsensical. And at least if that's a goal of yours, working towards it is, Bitcoin is a sensible way of working towards that.
So I actually agree with you. I agree with point one. I think it does. Well, it does if it receives. I guess it has to achieve a certain tipping point, right? And we don't know what that tipping point is.
It's already doing it at a very low level. There are a bunch of people that are able to avoid the state better than they could in the past, just by having Bitcoin available to them. And as the Bitcoin market cap grows, Bitcoin will become more powerful for that. As Bitcoin liquidity increases, i.e. the number of people that will accept Bitcoin as a form of payment, as that increases, that will also kind of empower people more and more to act outside of these state entities.
Well, I don't think we've got to the tipping point where it's negatively affecting the government's ability to do exactly as they want right now. I don't think it's causing a retreat just yet. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, I mean, the state is getting insane under the current corona conditions, right?
Yeah.
But it'll be slowing to a small extent.
There is a complex evaluation, because there is a trend. So you can think about the trend of a state power without Bitcoin, and it's growing in increasing pace at the end of the money manipulation and financial censorship parabola. And then there is the situation with Bitcoin that I think it's like Nate said, is objectively and undoubtedly decreasing respect to the alternative counterfactual when there is no Bitcoin. Like my cousin, because I always pay every tax, of course, always. But my cousin, for example, doesn't pay any serious tax on their income and wealth since a while right now. So hurrah for him. So, but people are fighting censorship in dictatorial regimes. This is happening. So there is less state intervention that in a world without Bitcoin. I think it's clear, it's logically clear, but still state intervention is probably growing because it was already growing for other independent trends that were set in motion way before Bitcoin, and to which Bitcoin is probably also somehow an answer and a response.
I guess that's where narrative becomes really important then, because if somebody has a goal with Bitcoin to separate money and state, therefore avoid paying taxes as such, then their use of Bitcoin very much needs to be a lot more around the circular economy and being able to essentially not leave too much of a like some kind of like financial track record. But like even if they're on the kind of government radar, the government say, well, you've got a business here. We haven't had any tax filings from you. How are you making money? Oh, you accept Bitcoin. There can perhaps be an investigation. Yes, it can be hidden, but that is a niche situation right now. Whereas it isn't a niche situation for some people to want to just own and have exposure to Bitcoin. So perhaps the big growth area for Bitcoin isn't people doing what you said there. The big growth area is people just want exposure to Bitcoin. It's digital gold. It's a hedge of inflation, and that's where the majority of the growth is. But those people perhaps will still then pay their taxes. But they're two very different narratives.
But inflation is a tax. I mean, it's both. They are strictly connected. Without if people stops buying inflation by following the legal tender, and actually they use an alternative for store of value, they will decrease the spending ability of the state, which will have less money to pay for agents that will have to individually investigate on people avoiding taxes with Bitcoin. So it's a feedback loop which is very complex, it's very intricate. I think that we can make a simplification and say that there are very few sense in which Bitcoin is increasing state power so far. Like there is some blockchain analytics, but still, if the comparison was credit cards, it's still so the differential. It's mostly negative in any case you can think for. Of course, you may say that mass adoption of people just opting out fiat inflation is stronger than pure black market. But I think that's illusory because Bitcoin is an edge against inflation only because so far the government is not forbidding to use it as an edge against inflation. If inflation becomes a serious problem and Bitcoin becomes a serious threat to the effectiveness of inflation tax, the government will just make illegal to be exposed to Bitcoin in an optimal way, just like they did with gold, with Roosevelt. So the point is that it's very circular. It's impossible to think that we trick the government out of the most powerful taxation mechanism ever, which is inflation, and the government will just say, okay, I will just tax your home, but I will not try to make money out of inflation anymore. That's just unrealistic. They will react, they will adapt, and everybody will ultimately be in a gray market or black market by definition, because that's the strength of Bitcoin, that it can resist legal ban.
Yeah, look, I'm not disagreeing, but I'm just saying that, like, reducing the power of the state, that the amount now is negligible. I would say it's not even on the radar of impacting the state, right? So there has to be a tipping point. But that tipping point, I don't know what that tipping point is. You know, we've gone through a pandemic and shut down economies, and the state hasn't lost any power. If anything, they've increased power. And if that is the narrative, if that is the important narrative, well, I mean, I might be an irresponsible myself. We're just talking about exposure to Bitcoin. Like, will a lot of people just be holding it on Coinbase, or will a lot of people just be buying it to sell in the future, and they don't give a fuck about having this black market economy? I just think they're two different narratives. And is Bitcoin either of them? Does it matter? Like, is it important to push that black market side? Is it important? Like, Because Neil, you opened up with a very passionate and right speech about the kind of disgusting way governments have treated people over the last whatever centuries. And if Bitcoin is a chance to stop this, then people just holding it on Coinbase or just buying it for exposure isn't really going to do that. It is people adopting the full black economy and choosing to avoid taxes. That's where it'll make a real difference.
I don't think people have to, like Giacomo said, people don't have to avoid taxes for this to work.
Okay.
The key is to make money more expensive again. So right now, the state inflates and takes out massive loans to kind of support its taxation, but also money is just super cheap. Like interest rates are like artificially low. It makes it easy for people that are politically affiliated to get hold of large sums of money. So like getting rid of that is a key step towards improving the situation. Also, like Giacomo said, once everybody is on a Bitcoin standard, if they're not holding on a custodian, then it makes it a lot easier for them to avoid tax if they decide that taxes become excessive or tyrannical. And that does happen in certain countries. So it's important that people have that option. But yes, I think you're right that the number goes up thing is more attractive to people. That's why most people get into Bitcoin in the first place. So myself, like I wasn't into any of this until I got into Bitcoin. I got into Bitcoin because the chart was going up.
Look at you now.
I think you'd be surprised how much people will change. I've got a big tweet thread of people saying my Bitcoin changed me. I think even holding some Bitcoin on Coinbase for a few months, people will already start to kind of see their ideas change. And as well, like if states do start leveraging and controlling and stealing from custodians, people's minds will change even faster because they were there for the number goes up and then their number goes down. Like they're going to be very upset. Yeah. So, and I think you'll see a move towards people taking more care about their keys, running their own nodes and stuff like that. But it potentially will take kind of that fight back to cause that immune reaction where people start taking more responsibility for their assets.
Yeah, it's funny. It does change. I definitely can empathise with that. I'll tell you something funny, Giacomo. When I back in end of 2016, when I got back into Bitcoin, I was a vegan. It's a true story.
Yeah, but I mean, we always the meat stuff, the carnivorous stuff, is another example of something that started as ironic, mostly, like toxic. So we started to overemphasize and use hyperboles about carnivorism because it's just funny. It's just also it's self-mocking about toxicity, but actually, if you think about that, it's not true that there is no connection. We were discussing this stuff, of course, with Saifedian a lot of times, but there is a connection. It's obvious that it doesn't mean that there is a deterministic link between Bitcoin and a change in your diet.
No,
you can get Bitcoin, but it's clear. But there is something there. For example, a generalized approach about so-called fiat experts. So right now we live in a world where governments are appointing people to create a pseudoscientific narrative about complex sciences where there is literally no experimental verification. So this stuff is true in microeconomics. So they are using that to justify interest rates, manipulation, and social structure and stuff. And they're using that in other fields as well. So there is a reason that when people become skeptical about the narrative in economics, they have higher probability to become skeptical about the prevalent narrative in other fields, which may mean that you become even more vegan because now you know that there is a government conspiracy against vegetables, or that it doesn't matter the outcome. What it matters is that there is a connection between an increase of skepticism about easy mainstream narrative in many fields. So there is a connection there.
I won't bring up global warming because we'll go off for another hour.
But it's similar. It's just, let's not get into details, but it's similar. It's not I don't find surprising that there is an overlap between skeptical people about prevalent narrative in any topic, including that. It's just natural. It doesn't mean it's not a proof. It's not that if Bitcoin works, that's a proof that global warming is not anthropic, or it is it's not that. it's not crazy that it shouldn't be surprising that people who are getting into Bitcoin are requiring more and more direct evidence to be independently verifiable about a lot of impactful and consequential theories and narratives.
No, I agree, and that skepticism is important. I've found it on myself sometimes, but at the same time, some of them are very wrong about global warming. But we don't need to go into that now. I'll just say that I'm right. We've gone down a rabbit hole here, like I didn't even expect we'll go to. But just bringing it back. Look, it's really useful for me. I am a centrist by heart, and I am somebody who thinks about. I'm a bit softer about certain issues, and I am conscious about not producing the wrong type of content or not leading. If I got newcomers to Bitcoin discover my podcast, not lead them down the wrong route. And that toxicity thing is really interesting, and I think I'm kind of falling on I don't want it ever to be malicious, but I think ultimately, like, this is this one shot at Bitcoin. It's important we get this right. We don't want social attacks, and I wouldn't ever want to produce something that helps support any kind of social attack. So it's been very useful for me. I don't know if it's useful for you too. Neil, you're a tough debater.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going on final words, like, I think one of the really important things to understand is that anybody in the industry right now, or anybody investing in Bitcoin, is doing so because they're expecting Bitcoin to grow. Now, you might not expect the market cap to go up very much. That's like illogical, because if you've got more users, the market cap is going up. Like, there's only a limited set of Bitcoins. So we're here because it's going to grow, and as it grows, things are going to get tougher, because it's going to start coming into competition with some very dangerous powers around the world, both banks and states as well. And the heat is going to be on, not only from within the Bitcoin sphere, where we're never all going to agree with each other, but also externally with people upset with what Bitcoin is doing. So, like, right now, we live, especially in like Western countries, we live in this democratic paradigm where everybody expects to have a say in everything that happens within their geographic area. And a lot of people, if like Bitcoin starts to succeed and fiat currencies start to fail, they're going to start thinking, well, I didn't vote for this. Like, this isn't something that I chose. And they're also going to be very upset to see some people getting rich while they're getting poor. Like pensions and stuff will start getting wiped out if like the fiat system starts to fail. So you're going to have a lot of very upset people. And if you're complaining about the low-level criticism that you get in the Bitcoin on Bitcoin Twitter or any of the other Bitcoin forums right now, like, that is nothing compared to what people will be facing down the line. So, like, I think it's important that we see kind of resilience as a good quality for people to have, and weakness as a bad quality for people to have. So, like, people need to toughen up, in my opinion. And then another thing that I think is really important to highlight: if toxicity is genuinely so risky to the Bitcoin project, if it can decelerate progress, or if it can actually destroy the project entirely, then it becomes an extremely cheap attack for Bitcoin's enemies to implement. So, like, if sending abusive messages to Bitcoin developers or shitcoiners is bad for the Bitcoin project, it's very, very easy for well-funded entities to set up farms to do exactly that and harass people and end the project right here. So, like, people need to understand that, like, they need to deal with these kind of issues, because Bitcoin does have enemies, and it will get hotter out there if it grows. I mean, you could feel, but yeah, if it grows.
Yeah, I struggle. I would struggle to argue against your points there, and it's definitely shifted my thinking. Considering the wider population, we just had a vote in the UK based on the government's response to the coronavirus, and only 13% of people think they've gone too far. So that's a lot of people we have to toughen up.
Yeah, it's
I saw that.
The comparison is very interesting, because what Neil is talking about is basically immunization. There is something that you cannot really shield from, because it's impossible to shield developers from internet criticism. So the only answer is not robustness, is not avoiding that. It's just anti-fragility. It just get immunity against that, which doesn't mean that I want to be the one writing you bad, nasty messages in private to tout you off. That's not the point. It's not about being personally mean. It's about challenge each other to become stronger and to accept and resist this kind of very cheap social attack, because there is no way we can shield people from those. So we may just as well help people to get some kind of immunity to that kind of stuff, and separating completely bad, unproductive bad behavior like random attacks from criticism that can also be strong criticism, because criticism is not always soft, because sometimes criticism can be deep, and when something is consequential, the debate can get heated. It's natural and it's healthy. So if you see somebody that is breaking down because of criticism, help him personally, be nice, but that let's not go into the inception in which we stop discussing the topic and we start, as Neil said, arguing against the people arguing against the topic in the wrong way. I mean, if you want to be nice, but not be nasty with people who are being nasty with nasty people, because that's a little bit too much. Yeah. And a lot of this discussion about toxicity is people being toxic to people because they think they're being too toxic with toxic people. This is a little bit too much of layers. Let's stay basic.
That's the show quote there. You've done it. I'm going to get that one out. That immunity to it is a good point. Look, it depends on who you are. Some people just floats off them. It can be brutal sometimes, and it can drain you, and it can affect your day. I mean, it can be tough to go through a period of bullshit. I spoke to other people who've been through it, but I was listening to Rogan the other day when he was talking about just fucking ignore people. Just that's it. That's the answer.
Well,
but
that's a big place, and like Bitcoin is totally permissionless. You can continue working on whatever Bitcoin project you want, whether it's core development or some kind of corporate project. You can continue doing that, and you can create your own spaces. Just get off Twitter, delete your account. Like if it's too much for you and it's horrible, there are very easy ways to create spaces online where you can vet the people that are coming in and make sure that they meet whatever requirements that like you need. But I guarantee you that people that set up those kind of spaces are very likely to come back to Twitter, because the spaces that they create, if they're too demanding, they're going to be sanitized. Everybody's going to be being fake to each other. It's not going to be a particularly exciting place to be. So I think like people need to bear in mind that like the rough comes with that kind of chaos that Bitcoin, Twitter, and other kind of public forums have.
Just as a closing point, it's a complete side issue. Neil, you mentioned if Bitcoin continues to grow, some people are going to get very rich and other people are going to lose money. I did a really interesting interview yesterday where you're seen from ARK Invest. I don't know if either of you seen the two white papers they've put out, just come out with regard to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a novel economic institution. In some ways, it's quite I said to him at the time, it's quite an anarchist paper. But one of the most interesting things is kind of like looking at Bitcoin in terms of revolution, changes in time. I mentioned this book, Engines That Move Markets. You had the industrialization. We had the internet. We've had the second phase in the internet, which is much more about information. And now we've got this kind of third phase, which is like the financialization, which is Bitcoin. And, if doing an industrial revolution, like the people who took the risks, who built the factories, are the ones that profited. The people who created the internet companies profited through the second wave of the internet. The people who created the social networks profited. If this is the natural evolution of humans towards another phase, which is a separation of money and state, the people who took the earliest risks will profit. That's just a natural conclusion that we have through every kind of epoch of human history.
Oh, sure. Well, who is better at predicting the future will invest better. That's an inevitable. Yeah. Of course, monetization in Bitcoin is not as trivial as in other fields. But the internet was also very challenging. Indeed, they came up with this monetization model, which is not great, which is advertising against free content. It's not great, but it was the only one, because the internet is too open and too permissionless to actually to scale a license model or stuff like, or pay to see stuff like that. So with Bitcoin is similar. There are many ways to monetize. The first one is hardware infrastructure, because hardware is not as permissionless as software. So a few companies will do ASICs. As it will never, I mean, never say never, but it will be a long time before people can make bio ASICs in their garden. You will need specialization to do ASICs, so that's profit, that's margin. Hardware wallets, maybe they will become a little bit more commodity, but still there will be a lot of risk, reputation, and trust involved. So probably you will have margins and you will have companies. Hardware nodes, maybe you can have people doing that themselves on their Raspberry Pi, but maybe some people will manage to put a small margin on some kind of easily verifiable hardware node. Then you have financial matching of demand and offer, which is exchanges. You will make money with exchanges, because if we have money on fiat money and this money is migrating to Bitcoin, somebody will have to bridge it, because Bitcoin doesn't need bridges, but fiat does. And whoever will provide the fiat escrow, the fiat gate, will make money, will profit from that. And then you can have people just buying Bitcoin and sitting on that, which is more like people buying web domains in the 90s and buying abc.com and pizza.com and just wait. Because if you have adoption, you have a scarcity, and you will have increasing of price. So that's inevitable, I think. And this is a more general dynamic, that if you are better at predicting the future and you can invest and you can save and you can choose, probably you will make money. So getting back to the culture ring of libertarians and tech guys and investors, the tech guys, especially open source tech guys, they are a little bit anti-profit. There is this bias again, that if you're making money, there's something wrong. But that's not the case. The point with closed software, with patents, is that people were making money in a wrong way that was actually hurtful to the world. It was bad for security, for auditability. It was bad for incentives. But making money is not wrong. If you are serving other people better, you will make more money, because your service is more useful for other people. It's just specialization, it's division of labor. Making money is great. There's nothing wrong in people making profit.
Good. All right. Well, listen. Look, we went through down a few different rabbit holes there, but it was great as ever. I've come out a tougher, harder Bitcoiner because of it. So thank you, Giacomo. How do people find you?
Well, actually, finally, there is www.giacomozucco.com. Panic FOMO helped me to set up a WordPress with BTC Pay server. So finally, you can mostly see my articles and videos, and you can check incoming workshops and seminars and subscribe. And you can also book my time, because a lot of people are asking for. So next time, Peter, you will have to use BTC Pay server for a podcast.
All right, I will use BTC Pay server. And Neil, how do people find you? And Neil, we don't do this enough. This is like nearly 2 years ago last time we did this. We should do it at least once a year. But how do people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Woodfine. Very easy.
Yeah. Don't expect him to be nice to you. All right, guys. Well, listen, look, good luck with everything. Thanks for coming on. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks.
All right. What do you think of that one? Did you enjoy that? I always love getting Giacomo on. It gives me such a hard time, but I do love getting him on. And a massive thanks to Giacomo, because he's always helping me out in the background. I do put some of my ideas by him. I do put things I want to work on with him. He is a guiding light. And also thanks to Neil. Neil, I have a few more tough conversations with. A few things recently where I've questioned UX and stuff, and I've had to have a conversation with Neil about that. But Neil is tough. That's the reason I wanted him on. I wanted to be pushed hard on this. And look, this ended up going down a political and libertarian rabbit hole. And to be honest, I felt the conversation probably could have gone on for another couple of hours. And I wasn't totally prepared for some of the areas it went in. I realised I need to sharpen my knives on some of the issues I have. I guess what it is I'm a bit of a centrist, and I try and see all sides, which means I don't always have a firm opinion of something. But that's just the way it is. But I really did enjoy this. It definitely shifted my opinion. So thanks to Giacomo and Neil for coming on and doing this. Like I always say, if you've got any questions about the show, you can reach out to me. My email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com. If you want to support the show, I've been asking recently if you can go on iTunes and leave me a review. And I've been getting a bunch of them recently. So thank you so much. Every one of you who've done it, I really appreciate it. If you do like the show, if you've got 2 minutes, please do head over to iTunes and give me a review. Hopefully 5 stars if you think I deserve it. It really helps with the rankings. I need to catch catch up Pomp because he's been killing it recently, and he's my nemesis. No, it's actually my friend, but still. Yes, if you can leave me a review, I would really, really appreciate it. As I said in my intro, Defiance is really killing it at the moment with this series about Ghislaine Maxwell. It's a fascinating story. We've gone down a real deep rabbit hole investigating her. She's the ex-partner of disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. That's all available at defiance.news. Outside of that, have a great weekend, and as I said, if you've got any questions, you can reach out to me. It's hello@whatbitcoindid.com.